Chancellor, it's indeed an honor to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, Ben Turok. Ben Turok, anti-apartheid activist, former member of parliament, and an academic who has degrees in engineering, in philosophy, and in political science, was one of the drafters of the Freedom Charter in 1955. He was born in Latvia in 1927, brought to South Africa in 1934, and graduated from the University of Cape Town in 1950, before working as a surveyor and a lecturer at the London Polytechnic Institute. While there, he undertook postgraduate studies and returned to South Africa in 1953, where he joined the South African Congress of Democrats. In 1955, he became its secretary for the Cape Western region, acting as a full-time organizer for the Congress of the People. He was charged in 1956, treason trial, and stood trial until charges against him were withdrawn in 1958. He evaded arrest in 1960, but was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 1962 after being convicted under the Explosives Act. After his release, he and his wife, Mary Butcher, who was also facing a prison conviction, spent the following 25 years in exile in Kenya, Tanzania, Britain, and in Zambia. They returned to South Africa when the then President F.W. de Klerk announced an amnesty for all exiles. He became an MP in the first democratic parliament, from which he retired before the last election. Chancellor, Mr. Ben Turok.
Chancellor, Chair of Council, SRC President. This is a democracy where the SRC has a president but the Council has a chair. Very democratic. Academic staff, graduating students, parents, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to speak to my old alma mater, particularly to engineering graduates. I should tell you that I've not been in this hall for close to 70 years. It's a long time. So if I have a lump in my throat as I speak to you, you will understand. But allow me to go back 70 years to when I was a first-year student in engineering, and when I attended the very first lecture in the faculty. The professor told us, he gave us advice, and he said, whatever you do as an engineer, the bridge must not fall down. Well, we did what you've done, which was to laugh, snigger a bit, and think that this comment was a little bit bizarre. We were very far from building bridges. But then we realized that there was something quite serious behind the comment about the bridge falling down. What he meant was that an engineer cannot afford to make mistakes. His work has to be rigorous and sound. And I must tell you that over all the years, I've never forgotten that advice. And so to my colleagues, and indeed to my staff, whenever they make a mistake, I say, the bridge must not fall down. But what the professor did not explain was why the bridge should not fall down. He might have explained that the destruction of such an event can be immense, and the cost. Also, the humiliation for the engineer who fails, and I'm addressing the students in particular, the graduates. The humiliation of the bridge falling down is immense. And perhaps you will never recover from it, and no one will ever ask you to build a bridge again. I have to confess to you that if I were to build a bridge now, it would fall down. So I shall certainly not do that. But fortunately, I also switched disciplines and am no longer a practicing engineer. I work in economics, as I will detail to you in a moment. What the professor also failed to explain is that a bridge is more than a technical structure. It is often a link between two places which have no common access. If you go to the rural areas, you'll find that bridges go across rivers, go across terrain which is otherwise impossible. It enables children to go to school when they couldn't do that before. It enables goods to be delivered to stores. It enables the communities to socialize. And there are bridges in the Transkei right now which enable communities to talk to each other and commune with each other, which they were unable to do before. So the bridge is really a very important symbol, not only of technical excellence, and this is my point. It's not only a symbol of technical excellence, it's a symbol of how we can unite communities and have a certain social goal in what we do. Let me give you a practical example. The example I want to indicate is how engineering links to economics. I imagine this is not frequently discussed in the Faculty of Engineering these days, although I may be wrong. Certainly in my time, that was not the case. But for several years, I've been deeply engaged in studies in the interface between mining and manufacturing. That is, the mineral value chain. Now, some of you graduates will be going to mining, or construction, or manufacturing, and what I have to say should be of interest to you. The mining industry in South Africa claims that their role is restricted to extracting mineral ores out of the ground and exporting them abroad. Because we are very, very well endowed with minerals, we are the best endowed country in the world as far as minerals are concerned. We are the very best. The mining industry says that their job is to pull the minerals out of the soil and export them abroad. And they say that this is where the comparative advantage lies in South Africa. A comparative advantage arises where a country has some natural resource which is not found elsewhere, and therefore you have a comparative advantage. South Africa has many comparative advantages over other countries, and this is why we're such a well-endowed country. This attitude in mining reflects the classical situation of former colonial countries, whereby some European power penetrated a country in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, and enabled them, a corporation, to invest heavily in that colony, extracting gold, silver, copper, or some other mineral. That mineral was then transported to Europe, where it was turned into a finished goods. And it is classical throughout Asia, Latin America, and Africa that the mineral wealth is extracted from the soil and exported as a raw ore to Europe or elsewhere, where it is turned into a finished goods. It's a classical situation. Unfortunately, when this happens, the minerals are depleted sooner or later and leave a large hole in the ground and not much else. This is what has been found in many countries in Africa, and we have it here in Kimberley. As anybody knows, Kimberley has large holes in the ground and a few shopping centers and not much else. The response from Africa to this particular pattern is that Africa has adopted the African Mining Vision, which is a flagship policy of the African Union, the African Development Bank, and the Economic Commission for Africa. I want to tell you that I'm extremely fortunate in that I'm involved in the policy development with the Economic Commission for Africa, and our aim is to develop industrialization across the continent because Africa has vast mineral wealth. Any of you who read the newspapers today will know that a large international airport is being built in Mozambique in the north, near a very large harbor. And the reason for that is that Mozambique is becoming a small gateway to Africa, especially in trade with India and China. So they're developing international facilities to bring in international ships, international airplanes, and so on. And let me say that I'm a bit perturbed that whereas we in South Africa often talk about South Africa as the gateway to Africa, the situation that is developing now because of this kind of development is that Africa, the rest of Africa, is beginning to develop gateways themselves. Kenya, for example, Nigeria, Tanzania, Mozambique, these are all becoming gateways. And there are lessons to be learned of this for us in South Africa. Fortunately, our own manufacturing industry also wants a different model to the old mining model. They want two things. Firstly, they want to supply engineering and other equipment to the mines, which we have done for a long time. 20, 30 years ago, South African manufacturing supplied a great deal of the equipment for the mining industry. That capacity has declined over the last few years, and it needs to be reversed. We need to be able to supply equipment to the mining industry manufactured in South Africa, and engineers should be conscious of that. Secondly, the mining manufacturing industry wants minerals to be beneficiated into final goods in South Africa. In other words, in economic terms, we wish to add value here and not abroad. From the perspective of national interests, this is surely a sound argument. It will do the following. It will increase our technological capabilities. It will develop new enterprises. It will broaden our tax base. It will enhance our research and development, and it will create employment. I'm going to repeat that because I hope that the engineering graduates will perhaps focus on that when they leave UCT. The following will happen. It will increase our technological capabilities. It will develop new enterprises. It will broaden our tax base. It will enhance our R&D, and it will create employment. These are great advantages. Compared to exporting raw ores, if we actually process and add value internally, this is wonderful news. And we will find ways thereby of increasing our technical capabilities and creating employment. There are, however, some you won't object, Chancellor, if I'm a little controversial. There are economists, including one or two at UCT, who don't agree with this. They say that proximity to natural resources does not mean that you should turn them into final goods. The arguments are rather complex, and I can't go into them here. But there is a big debate throughout academia, but also in industry and in government, about whether South Africa should continue to be primarily a mining exporting country, or whether we should also industrialize, go down the value chain, and go that route. I would have thought that engineers can think more clearly than economists. I work in economics, forgive me. And I would say at a very simple level, if you have grapes, of course you export grapes, but you also make wine. If you have good fruit, of course you export the fruit, but you also export jam. If you have manganese, you make steel. If you have polymers, you make plastic goods, and so on and so on. Whatever natural resource, and by the way, South Africa is excellent at turning coal into polymers, as members of staff will know. We do a great job in turning quite raw coal into final products, into polymers and the rest, polypropylene and the rest. I can never understand, if I want to buy a gold ring, I will have to buy an imported ring, even though the gold is South African. Why is it that we do that silly thing? Diamonds, the same. Anyone here wants to get engaged or married and you want a diamond ring, you're going to buy a South African diamond, but it's made in India or in Italy or in Amsterdam or somewhere else. The point is that a country to thrive, to develop, must turn its natural assets into national assets, not into individual assets. They must become national assets, especially where there are technological gains to be made and, of course, employment, which is our priority right now. Unfortunately, decisions taken about our industrial development is not taken by engineers or technological trained people, but driven by financial interests, whether it be in government or in the private sector. Let me pause and say to you this, that in South Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan, when they wanted to industrialize, the people in charge were engineers, not economists, not financial experts. And I think we should learn the lesson that engineers need a far higher place in the hierarchy in South African decision-making, both in government and the private sector. That is my bias as a former engineer. And so I would urge that engineers ought to have views on these matters. You cannot confine yourselves to technical issues alone. There are many developmental and indeed socioeconomic consequences of what you do. There is no room for complacency. Indeed, the challenges across the whole continent are increasing daily. You saw in the newspapers that the GDP of Nigeria is now said to be bypassing South African GDP. As I said, Eastern Africa is going to have more oil and gas than Scotland, than the UK. This is a huge challenge for us in South Africa. It's a challenge that engineers, above all, must take seriously. In addition to that, they must consider the social consequences of that engineering. So to conclude, I end with a slogan. Good engineers build societies, not just machines. Good engineers build good societies, not just machines. I hope that UCT has produced well-rounded engineers who are going to do that and make us all proud. Thank you.